It originally started as part of a co-working space, Creative Union, which had a very, very short life. But we were looking for a way to spread the word about the co-working space, to bring people in, to associate ourselves with kind of creative energy in Somerville. So we decided, because we had very little money, that we would start a speaker series. Creative Union, very shortly after, unfortunately, was not well funded enough to continue. But we'd had the first Creative Somerville series, and it was just fantastic. It was with the Aeronaut founders, and it just was this great conversation where people were really getting a look behind the kind of, awesome story and building and establishment that this brewery is. And we were just thinking, there's lots of opportunities for people to do talks, but usually they're really formal and people are kind of giving their canned speeches. And we really like the informality and the kind of ability to understand what's the story behind someone's story, right? What's the process behind the kind of clean picture at the end. And also, a venue for people in Somerville who are doing cool things to get to talk about those things, and for people to get to talk to each other. You come to hear someone else speak, and then, the guy sitting next to you, you're doing this thing, he's doing that thing, and it kind of opens you up to get to meet your neighbor. Goal is to have fun night for people to be inspired by people's talks, and to just kind of celebrate Somerville. Outcome, if I would know that we had been successful if I heard about cool projects or things or connections that got off the ground because people either heard something that made them excited here or met here. So that, it's kind of hard to track that, but, if that happens, then I'll know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
These blocks are incredibly collaborative, they're intergenerational, they're irresistible. We wanted to understand, how does play in public space work? What are the elements needed in terms of design, creating a space, creating rules? Every play, action, or game needs rules. How do we create an environment where the rules are implicit and graspable, and also easy to subscribe to and desirable to subscribe to? So we found these blocks are really useful. They're intergenerational. They serve different purposes. People use them as conversation starters. And what happened was people would build individually and then start to connect and build larger structures. Once they got tired of their own structure, they would kind of start to work together. So we did that a couple of times at these block parties, and then we started to get ready to really dive into the story of Boston. So these play actions are nice, but we don't want to stop at these pop-up play interventions. And we started to look at Boston. And on the left is a map that you often see as a tourist of Boston, often without that city limit actually drawn in for you, right? So big chunks of Boston are left out of the tourist accessible maps, as well as often the mental maps of many Bostonians across the city. Somerville actually has one that they completed in 2010 called Summer Vision. And it's a document that, as the city develops and moves forward in the years that follow, it's a way to check back in and say, is this neighborhood level development or plan in line with our broader vision that we spent years developing? So Boston doesn't have this, and instead leaves it up to each neighborhood to create their own master plan. Neighborhoods that are sort of most vulnerable, most at risk of change and displacement and rapid kind of development cycles, may not have the resources to create a plan for themselves, a strategic plan for the neighborhood. So they're often kind of left reacting to changes that are happening instead of being proactive. We became fellows last summer in the Expressing Boston Fellowship, again through the Design Studio for Social Intervention and the Boston Foundation. It's a collection of 10 fellows and 4 artists in residence, all of whom are focused along the Fairmount Cultural Corridor, as it's called. So Fairmount is a commuter rail line. Many of you probably know it goes from South Station all the way down to Hyde Park, and it goes through some of the most diverse neighborhoods of Boston. And in the last decade or so, there's been increased interest in that line and the neighborhoods along that line. And there's been a lot of improvements, there's been a lot of investment, a lot of interest from the BRA in the neighborhoods along that line and in developing those neighborhoods. The media often portrays many of those neighborhoods as vacant land, abandoned properties, but of course, every abandoned property in a city actually has a story, and no neighborhood is truly abandoned, right? So there's a ton of stories along these neighborhoods, and people who live along the line are at once excited about the upcoming changes. Like, we met a woman who's like, I'm excited to not have to drive to the South Bay Shopping Center to go to a cafe. I want to be able to have coffee with my friends. But at the same time, they're petrified of displacement, of economic disparity growing wider in the neighborhood, and of actually not being able to benefit from any of the changes that are coming. So if you're familiar with the Exquisite Corpse, the surrealist game where you can do it with pictures or with words, where you start a sentence and then you pass it off to another person, and based on your last word of the sentence, they continue the story. So we're going to play a number of these kinds of games with elder storytellers as well as teens on the train to get them kind of seeing and imagining the stories of what they see on the train. And eventually this will become a performed theater piece of local residents who will work with actors and we'll all get training. I don't know anything about theater either yet. About how do we create these stories into a play where as the train travels from South Station to Hyde Park and vice versa, the different residents from along the line are describing what they see out the window in 20 years. So not what they're afraid of seeing, which is the current conversation, but what they want to see. So the goal there is to spend several months working with a number of residents in developing these stories and then having a performance run on the train that becomes a place to share these stories of this is what we want for our neighborhood.
All right, so that's fantastic to see. But to kick things off, want to take you back a little bit to talk a little bit about what, how did you start out as an artist? What drew you to that in the first place? Before planning was even in the picture, what were you up to? And did you see the threads of this future interest in play and in public space back then? Yeah, take us back a little bit.
Okay. So I actually, when I was 11, I decided I was going to be an architect, to really take you back. And that plan remained in place until I was 18. I got a full scholarship to college to go to architecture school. I did that for a year, and then I realized I didn't have any interest in, my school was very technical. I had no interest in drawing perfect cubes and building perfect models. I wanted to talk about what was happening in the space and why. So I decided to switch to art school. And my art school was the opposite of the architecture school, and that was incredibly conceptual. My photography teacher and I used to get into fights because I was like, teach me composition. And she said, no, just go look. So it was a very different experience. And I was really interested in activating public space at a sort of gut instinct level, I guess. I never really did shows in galleries. Even my senior show with that photography teacher, actually, who's still a mentor, we installed in a gallery, so I put my images across the street in the bus stop. Without really having any ideology. It just felt like we're in a particular neighborhood. Nobody who lives in that neighborhood is going to enter the gallery. It was one of those vacant storefront situations. And I wanted to my work to be in the public realm, not in this weird gallery that nobody would ever staff, except for during the opening. So I went through art school, and then I started after school working for a large art studio with an incredible artist, Lauren Bond, who had done, this was all in Los Angeles, I should say, who had been doing large-scale public art interventions, but they were bigger than art. She was taking brownfields, literally brownfields, like toxic land, and creating, she was really into the idea of social sculpture, right? Joseph Boy's idea of social sculpture. So she was transforming through very long-term projects. She's still working on some that I was with her for 6 years ago. Transforming them into socially and ecologically kind of vibrant green fields, if you will. So in that process, it was a wonderful team, and the projects that she was doing were at a landscape architecture scale and a system scale, and we talked a lot about the city as a system, and that really turned me on to looking at planning, because I really wanted to study urbanism, but that doesn't really exist as a study here. You either study urban design or urban planning, and since I wasn't an architect, I couldn't study urban design. So I went to planning school, and I found myself, planning school was very professionally minded, training you to be a planner. So I took as many art classes as I could. And my focus in planning was in studying public space in the kind of more abstract sense. I knew I wouldn't, become an actual planner and worry about zoning and economic development from the kind of city side. I was interested in cultural development, really, in public space and what public space meant for the public life of the city. So I went through planning school, sort of rebellious, I guess, and my concentration in planning was art, design, and the public domain. So kind of always pushing that. And then I went to Mexico for a year and got to actually think in public space for that year, which was really awesome.
During this kind of jump from art planning, this Mexico City experience, which sounds like it was really formative, and then now kind of turning, I guess, previous department of play into what it is now, has there been a moment that you're just thinking like, yes, this is exactly, like this is what, I didn't know what it was, but this is it. I'm doing what I want to be doing, and if so, what is that moment? What are the pieces that make it so?
Yeah, I can tell you. So the Department of Play was born in my first semester of grad school. I moved from LA to Boston, and Boston is really different than LA, if you haven't noticed. And I had culture shock. It's very serious. The city is beautiful, but like untouchable. Public spaces exist, and in LA, every single square of public space is packed and overutilized and very informal, and there's music and there's people yelling and dancing and laughing. That's really ideological sounding, that's not really true, but you get my point, right? The public life, as car-centric as it is somehow vibrant, and it probably has to do with the climate. And here, people were very stiff. And I was going to Harvard, right? So my very first week, I was told I couldn't talk directly to the dean, which having come from California, I was like, what do you mean? Because I wanted to tell them about whatever. So Department of Play literally was my reaction to Boston. Like, y'all need to play, right? Like, so initially the project, which I created the project in Professor Vodichko's MIT interrogative design class was the name, and the project initially was about kids sharing tools about secret play spaces in the city. So that was kind of the first concept of the Department of Play. Was Vodichko and I bonded about how we both grew up in Poland and we never played in playgrounds. I grew up on a construction site, so we would find like holes and wells and whatever in the forest to play in, and that unscripted play element was the magic of playmaking. So the idea of Boston being this rigid place that had the appropriate amount of playgrounds in many neighborhoods, how did kids get to actually experience and be free? So that was the idea. And one of the formative moments was when Professor Chris Csikszentmihalyi, who is now in LA, stood up during my final review. And the project I developed was just a PDF. There was no, it was meant to be a website or something, but it was purely a proposal. And he stood up, he was a critic at our review, and he said, this could be your life's work. That was his feedback for my project, and I was like, really? And so this project, I don't know if it's because of his words or he saw the future, but this project kind of lay dormant, and it actually became a research group. The next day, I found out there was a group of researchers meeting at the Media Lab who are all interested in youth agency building mapping tools. Tools for building youth agency in the city that revolved around mapping. So somehow my thing, they all had the tools, but they didn't have a strong commitment to any issue that they were pushing with a specific thing. So my thing about kids sharing play spaces was like a story that helped them localize and kind of push forward their tools. So we worked together, we did a number of projects. And then when I went to Mexico, and they all were researchers and went their own ways, and it lay dormant. So, but it's always been this, I knew I had to come back and fully live it. So I guess from that moment, it's been cooking.
Tell us about a moment where things really sucked, and we were thinking this great vision that I have, this life's work or whatever, is really, really difficult, or is this really worth all it takes? And tell us a moment that was hard, and then, how'd you get through it? Did you get through it?
I'm an optimist, so I tend to try to convert to focus. I think. What was hard? Well, I could speak maybe not to a specific moment, but something that's been hard that maybe many of you may be able to relate to is if you don't want to find a full-time job working for someone else, I guess this is where the entrepreneurial spirit comes in, it gets really hard, right? So there have been, since I came back from Mexico, I for a while had an awesome job working with the city of Boston with the new urban mechanics. Some people call them the Department of Fail. Because they're the city's civic innovation incubator. They're amazing, and they're in the mayor's office, so they have direct kind of access to the powers that be, but they also have had to collaborate with all the different departments across the city, and they hold the risk for other city departments to take risks, to try things. So they do short, quick, dirty projects that are allowed to fail, unlike many city level projects, as you can imagine. So anyway, sorry, got distracted there, but so I had an awesome job with them, and then when that ended, I knew I was kind of, coming back to this Department of Play. I didn't want a full-time job, even when I'm a bad employee. This is on camera, but I get distracted. I'm like, oh, these are my work hours, what else can I do? So I even when I was working with them, I started taking this Fab Academy, this digital fabrication class that is how I'm able to make these blocks, right? Radically transform my practice of what I can physically create. So after I stopped working for them, it was kind of like, what do I do now? How do I keep a contract work going so that I can really work on this other stuff as much as possible? So that's actually been the hardest, was becoming a freelancer and developing this paid gig career while really developing the art practice, whether it's Department of Play or other projects. I've done small other one-off projects since Mexico. So that balance, I intend this to be full-time, but meanwhile, what is the this that I can offer? What do I know how to do that people today want to pay money for? So that's been very humbling, and really that's gotten tricky several times. So if you're in the boat, hang in there.
Maybe do tips for
So tips. Actually, my next door neighbor is an awesome, aspiring. Not a fashion designer, a stylist with a master's in philosophy. Right? So we have a lot of conversations about starting your own business, and she's like a year and a half ahead of me in the entrepreneurial side. And she told me that she reads a lot more business information. She told me it takes 3 years to start a business for it to be successful. So bootstrap it for 3 years, and don't get discouraged. So I guess my advice is find a friend that helps you feel not insane. Periodically we just get together for coffee on a Tuesday at 10 because neither of us have anything else to do. We're like, oh shit, are we losers or are we okay? So having that person who's in a similar time, I guess, is key. Because we're all okay, but especially being in an environment like Cambridge, Somerville, where you meet people that are like, so what do you do? I'm a freelance designer. What? They're like, who do you work for? Google? No? Okay, who are you? So that kind of finding your identity within a very kind of label-driven, success-driven, and with a particular definition of success environment can be tricky. Another project that I think I'm allowed to announce, a different friend and I are curating a show at the BSA, the Boston Society of Architects. They do things a year and a half in advance. So we'll be working on that as well. So that doesn't feel like God, I have to do that. That's thrilling because that's research. The exhibit is on inflatables. I've spent a lot of the last year building inflatables with young people. Actually, I worked with the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative building an inflatable with their kids that they then used around vacant lots around the neighborhood to talk with residents about how those vacant lots might be used. So you see a giant bubble, and you have to stop. So then the kids are like, well, while you're at it, why don't you tell us what you want to see here? So it was kind of a different way to have a community meeting. So the jobs that I'm getting are becoming really exciting.
So right now, what are your 3 favorite either tools or, the way you talked about the inflatables or whatever, the new kind of skills that you're learning or things that you have access to from making?
I think I'm going to look at Laura's because I just worked on a project with the Interaction Institute where we created a truck for a city planning project around the future of transportation. Some of you probably heard about the question campaign, maybe ask questions. So we drove around in a truck, and actually I would say trucks. We drove around the city in a truck that I got to design the kind of exterior, interior of, asking people to give us questions around the future of mobility. So it was kind of a spectacle designed to kind of inspire people to stop and wonder, what is this? And then we could kind of have a way in to ask them to think about the future of getting around in the city. So actually, yeah, I would have to say trucks. So I've worked on 3 truck projects now. And I think the first one was with an art museum in Poland. There was absolutely no like urbanism agenda. It was called City Factory. It was more a conceptual art piece. And then the second 2 were about community engagement. The second one was the Up Truck. I helped out the artist Cedric Douglas in Upham's Corner, who was doing community engagement with a truck that he outfit and we were doing different events every weekend. And then this last truck. So I think the truck is almost a symbol of meeting people where they are, right? So not having to come to the community meeting or go to City Hall to address sort of engagement issues or to participate in urban governance, but it's a way of literally moving across different neighborhoods and different boundaries and engaging people and carrying gossip from one neighborhood to the other. There's an awesome artist in Mexico who did a project. He outfitted a little car to travel on the defunct Mexican railroad tracks. And it was a tiny car that went through all these villages that used to be connected through the train. And since the trains don't run anymore, the communities have kind of lost easy access to talking to one another. So when he would travel along the tracks, people from the different villages would interact with him and say, "What are the other people doing? Tell us, bring us the news." So it had actually, the train had acted as this gossip vehicle. So I kind of am thinking about that when I say the truck. But yeah, so as far as like medium goes, like the mobile installation, and one of the things that we're hoping to get with this Art Place grant is actually the means to make a mobile studio. So since we're really trying to push this idea of the city as an entity, a city as a system, and maybe even region, moving to, why do we have these borders between Cambridge and Somerville, or how do we make it, when they are irrelevant, how do we make them irrelevant, because we can easily get through them. So we're hoping to get a mobile studio, because if we were to commit to a physical space somewhere, then we're, whether we want to or not, would be more ingrained in that neighborhood. So we want to stay light-footed and mobile. So yeah, definitely trucks.
If you feel up to it, would you share with us your something from your diary entry from 2020? Either for you, or if you choose to self-censor, which is totally fine. You can talk about Department of Play.
Yeah, well, it's all together, right? Let's see. So in 2020.
And make it on Mars, please.
Make it on Mars? No, I'm just kidding. No, but that's in 2024. Okay. So you've all heard that the first Martians are going up in 2024 from Earth, right? Elon Musk has his way. So we're still on Cambridge.
Okay.
So the Department of Play is being run out of a couple of educational institutions with participation from local government, of course. And it's a research center dedicated to like the collaboration between academic institutions and, wow, now that I'm telling you this and it's on camera, I have to do it. So the vision was that it's run out of and with academic institutions, but very much with like community grounded partners in different neighborhoods. The word community, we can talk about that. What community is very strange. So we're saying neighborhood because we recognize that in every physically bounded geographic area, there are multiple communities that have a stake to that, especially in a city, right, which is like Boston. So that's happening. I have a couple of kids. I have a house, or at least an apartment with like heat and stuff. With a studio in my house. There's like life things like that. What else do you want to know? So the blocks are actually The purple foam blocks that I showed you, those are actually becoming a company with the husband of my Department of Play partner. So those have become a successful business in 5 years, and they're helping to fund the Department of Play. So they actually are becoming a company for real. We don't know yet if they'll have any funding to help us out. But those are some of the things. And I highly recommend this exercise. Like, put yourself, in your own 5 year from now future. I wrote and wrote today. It was fun.
So, before we thank Kate, I just want to invite everybody to stick around for a while, because the point of this is not just for you to meet Kate and be inspired by her, although I do know somebody who knows about theater who I want you to meet so that you can know about theater, but it's also for you guys to meet each other, get a chance to chat, hear about what each other are doing, so, grab a beer, stick around, talk to your neighbor. But, with that, just want to thank Kate for her time tonight, for inspiring us, and thank you guys for being here.
I'm a urban designer, so obviously I'm in this field already, and as a human being also, just giving me a little bit of, hope and broader vision about things, kind of an inspiration.